Maxine Doogan of an organization known as CUSP, based in Alaska. Could you please explain what CUSP stands for?
CUSP is the Community United for Safety and Protection, and we are a group of current and former Alaska sex workers and sex trafficking victims working towards safety and protection for everyone in Alaska's sex trades.
Now, Tara, Burns, and Maxine Doogan are basically the boots on the ground there in Alaska, talking to legislators about various issues which impact the erotic service provider community. Could you please tell us about, Maxine, what are you talking to the legislators? What are you actually asking for?
Well, we are meeting with all the legislators who are on the judiciary committees and on the subcommittee for the Department of Public Safety. So, of course, we're talking to them about stop having sex with us in these anti-prostitution sting operations under the guise of rescuing us for trafficked victims. We're also talking to them about their special criminal investigation unit, which is, spending $600,000 a year under the guise of trying to rescue minors in the industry. And Tara has done a great job here of documenting that actually no minors have been identified in the industry so far, in that somebody is forcing them to work. And so therefore we're telling legislators that that is a waste of money, that they need to scrutinize that particular expenditure, especially right now in Alaska where they're having major state budget issues and they're looking at doing major budget cutbacks. They're looking at instituting a income tax, which is something that they haven't had for decades. So that's what we're trying to talk to some of the legislators about.
Tara, Maxine mentioned the research that you've done. Could you go into, explaining what type of research you've been doing in Alaska?
Yeah, so every year, every January, I make a public records request from, the state attorney general, where we call it the Department of Law here, that keeps the records for all of the state charges, and the Anchorage Municipal Attorney for all of the charges, that have been filed for the year for sex trafficking and prostitution and promoting prostitution. And then I also check for federal cases. So here in Alaska, nobody has been charged with trafficking a minor since 2009. But, we've spent over $1 million now on this unit that exists to, locate and rescue juveniles who are being forced into prostitution, which is $1 million that we can't really afford right now. We have, Head Start programs are shutting down. The state is being sued over not testing rape kits. So, and not have, they're saying that they don't have the money to test the rape kits. But if this money had been spent testing rape kits, then the state wouldn't be being sued right now.
So we plan on being here for the whole run of it. Right now, the state House body, which is a lower house body, has decided that they are not going to have any subcommittee hearings on any other type of legislation besides the budget. So that gives us an opportunity to go in and talk to all those committee members. We had so many meetings last week. One day we had 7 meetings in one day, just educating legislators about this particular waste of money, and when they have these subcommittee meetings on the budget, that they should really scrutinize, this money and where it's going. So the problem with the way they have the rules now is that they can call that committee meeting on a moment's notice, that they don't have to give very much notice at all. So we're just really standing by, waiting to see when these committee meetings are going to be held, and if these lawmakers are really going to hold the Department of Public Safety's feet to the fire on this particular expenditure.
That's actually pretty amazing. Wow. And, how have you, as far as how you've been received by the legislatures, could you both each give your impression of, how people have been receiving you, their attitudes and so forth? Maxine?
I think that it varies from legislator to legislator. Sometimes we don't even get to talk to the actual legislators. We only get to talk to their aides. So for some legislators and some legislative aides, this is the first time they're ever going to hear from people like us. So they might be taken aback by some of the things that we're saying. It's the first time they've ever met any real people who are affected by the anti-sex trafficking laws. We're talking a lot to them about the anti-sex trafficking laws. And once again, Tara has done a great job of documenting that. In Alaska here, the sex trafficking laws are actually being used to arrest people for sex trafficking themselves. So I don't think that's what the legislators intended. And that's what we're telling them. You know, you guys passed these laws in 2012, and now look at the unintended consequences, and you need to change the law around the sex trafficking yourself sort of business.
Are there any other states that do that charge people with trafficking themselves?
So, you know, one thing that's happening is these laws that are currently being called sex trafficking laws, and they're felonies now, previously in most states were promoting prostitution laws and were mostly misdemeanors. So before the sex trafficking law here was a sex trafficking law, we had a lot of the same language, but it was called promoting prostitution, and it was mostly a misdemeanor. So Tennessee is another state I've found where their promoting prostitution law is a felony, and the majority of people who are charged under that promoting prostitution law are sex workers who are, you know, charged with placing their own advertisements online, and they have to register as sex offenders. And I've even read charging documents in, you know, Tennessee where women are, you know, like they go to do a bust and they find like 3 women in a hotel room with a guy who has a bunch of money and cell phones, and he's not being charged with anything. They're being charged with promoting prostitution of themselves and forced to register as sex offenders.
And what do you think, Tara, as far as how people have been receiving you guys as you're talking to different people there in Juneau?
You know, legislators are just people, and they're all different, so they all receive us differently. You know, one great thing about Alaskans is we have a really strong ethic of, you know, privacy and respect for the individual. We call it, where I'm from, we call it build your own cabin. So I think that we get a lot better reception maybe here in Alaska than in other places.
Now, what would you say is the best thing that's happened so far while you've been, you know, doing what you're doing there in Juneau?
Well, one great thing that happened recently is, I don't know if you remember, some people might remember Senate Bill 21, which we have, you know, successfully opposed for the last couple of years. The way that it was originally introduced was really awful and kind of made a really strong distinction between sex workers and people who have never done any kind of sex work, who are like, you know, innocent lily white virgins, and really kind of encouraged victimizing sex workers. So, you know, we have successfully opposed it for the last 2 years, and we're very excited that the sponsor, Berta Gardner, has updated the language in it now so that it would now allow people who are victims or witnesses of crimes like murder, assault, and sex trafficking to make reports to the police without being charged with prostitution. And they could still be charged with sex trafficking themselves, but that's another issue.
Well, that's pretty amazing. You know, that's definitely something.
Yeah. So there's going to be some committee meetings and hearings coming up on that bill, and we will be asking people from our community to call in and offer public testimony.
Regarding SB 21, what are some of the changes that you would like to see implemented?
So one thing, Senate Bill 21 allows people to report a really short list of very serious crimes without being charged with prostitution. And we would like to see a few crimes added to that list. Extortion, which of course is, the most common felony that people in our community are a victim of, and robbery, armed robbery, and also sexual assault of a minor and child pornography, which are, more rare things, but things that when we do encounter, it's very important that we be able to report them to the police.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without the threat of being arrested or being investigated for prostitution or for sex trafficking ourselves.
And especially because, under Alaska state law, property forfeiture is a part of prostitution conviction. So, you can lose your home potentially for making a report to the police of child sexual abuse if it was something that you became aware of.
It's so interesting to me, Elle, that when they pass these anti-sex trafficking laws under the guise of rescuing victims, they are very broad, they're very detailed in some ways, they're very all-encompassing. They seem to pass them all in one fell swoop where they're altering multiple statutes at one time. But when it comes to understanding that these laws are not being used at the way that they were intended, they only want to walk back, a tiny little bit of the language, if that. So, while it might be politically advantageous to pass, these types of laws and show that you're really championing the victims, but, when the evidence shows clearly that, the laws that you passed were bad laws on behalf of the people, then, there needs to be a larger outcry from the public to force these legislators to take responsibility and do their job and to fix these bad laws that are costing states a lot of money to enforce with no benefit.
Let's see. I think any other questions?
Do you have anything else you want to throw in there, Tara?
I'm really excited in talking to lawyers about how our court case is might be slightly different than the case in California, because we have so many documented cases here in Alaska where, people's constitutional rights have been horribly violated due to the prostitution laws, by police having sex with them during prostitution stings and stuff like that. So I'm excited to see, how all of those different instances end up being used.
Well, we do have a website. It's called Sex Trafficking Alaska, and everybody should go on the site. There's, some great audio from people who have been caught up in these bad laws, that people should listen to their story and hear, what they have to say. We also have an event coming up here in Juneau, March 16th. It's a movie that we're going to be showing at the Goldtown Nickelodeon Theater starting at 5:30, and it's the Scarlet Road movie, the movie about Rachel R., who is the legal sex worker in Australia and providing services to her clients who are people with disabilities. So, that's going to be another effort that we can do some outreach and some community education about some of the other aspects of prostitution, because oftentimes what happens, Elle, when we are talking to these legislators and we're giving them all this huge information, about what's going on, and then they say to us at the end, but what about the sex trafficking victims? What about the people who are forced? And so it's just like sometimes, even though you're showing them another side to the story here, they just are really stuck on some of that rhetoric that doesn't have a lot of documentation to it. So to try to give them as many different views as possible on what, sex work really looks like.
And to convince them that even people who actually are sex trafficking victims deserve to be able to go to the police and report that without being arrested or being charged with conspiring to traffic themselves, as has happened here in Alaska.
Well, thank you so much for being the boots on the ground in Alaska. and your work is greatly appreciated, and I know I'm very appreciative of you guys, and thank you so much. And is there anything else you want to add? Or
yeah, so if you come to the website, it's sextraffickingalaska.com. There's a button where you can donate to keep us here in Juneau. There's a button where you can sign the petition. And if you are an Alaska resident and you sign the petition, it will automatically email your legislators for you and let them know any, and it also includes comments that you leave. So that has been a hugely useful thing when we go into legislators' offices now. They are like, wow, we've been getting emails about this. So that is great. And you can also scroll all the way to the bottom of the page and put your email in to get newsletters, and then we will let you know when it's time to call in and testify at some of these legislative hearings.
Excellent. I'm very glad you mentioned that because, funding is so important. You guys are doing the work you're doing on barely even a shoestring budget, right? And you're sitting there biting their heels and very dedicated to the process, and that's how to get the changes in policy that we need and want. And it costs money. It costs money to be there, and we are extremely underfunded. And thank you for reminding me to remind everybody about that, because there'll be lots of information below the video on how people can support your work there in Alaska, and I hope that they do. And I wish you all success there in Alaska.
Thank you, Elle.
Thank you.
Thank you.